today is Carr Selinger, and he is the author of Stuff You Don't Learn in Engineering School. So I'm going to turn it over to Carr.
Well, thank you, Helen. I hope everybody can hear my nice little birdie outside. Oh, goodness. This is what you call an unexpected situation. The bird is going to keep on talking, and I can't do much about it. So here we go. Thank you all for coming to this webinar and taking the time out from probably a busy day to listen in on stuff you don't learn in engineering school. Uh, I've been really fortunate to be doing this for almost 20 years now, and IEEE has been a very consistent sponsor of my traveling around to different sections around the country and in Canada, and also publishing my book of the same name, Stuff You Don't Learn in Engineering School. And I've also had the opportunity to write articles as a contributing editor for Spectrum magazine. The reason I'm saying that is that as we go through some material pretty quickly, the soft skills that you need to learn in your career to be effective and happier, that we're obviously going to spend an hour today together and probably answer a few questions. And I noticed Mauricio how to survive as a bird in today's world. Well, we're not going to be able to ask him, Mauricio, but it's a good point. Actually, we will be covering a lot of ground here, and this presentation is really an overview of the soft skills. And we'll be taking some questions from time to time, so I will look at them as you're entering them on the left side of my screen and try to answer them perhaps as we go along, or save questions till the end. Also, that door you hear slamming, if you do, is something on Firefox that I can't get rid of. And there it is again. So moving right along, what I want to start out with is a quote from the chairman of the chief executive of General Electric, Jeff Immelt, who basically has a mantra of make yourself better every day. And what he means by that, and I buy into this, and this was really the heart of what I'm trying to say, make yourself better every day. I would argue that you're taking the time out and registering and attending today's seminar is an example of that. But he has 3 points, does Jeff Immelt. One is that all generations experience change. And I like to start by saying that because we've been living through a very difficult time. Certainly the economy is maybe strengthening a little bit now, but this has been a very difficult time for all of us around this country, around the world, over the past couple of years. And I think that the point I wanted to make is to keep this in perspective, that over my career, and I have a 40-year career in engineering and transportation and aviation, there have been many ups and downs and cycles in the business world. And I think that we all have to ride through these. Some of you out there are older and perhaps understand what I'm saying. Others, perhaps younger, are very upset and concerned by what goes on in our world every day. And so I think the point here is that we will get through this, and we as engineers are perhaps arguably in a very good position to benefit with our technical skills and our technology know-how to do well in a changing, turbulent environment. But one thing is certainly true, and I buy into this: you can't predict the future. So don't waste any time worrying about it. Now, I know some of you out there are worriers, and I'm going to ask you in this ether to raise your hand if you're a worrier. Oh, I see a few hands going up there. Worriers are Worrying is actually, I think, one of the most useless, unhelpful traits to have today, because it doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't change anything. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We waste time, and some of us, worrying about it. It's like regretting things that happened in the past that we can no longer change. And it's somewhat like the guilt you may feel of not being able to do the best you can, or not having all the time in the world to accomplish something. So we burden ourselves with these kind of things, and I think that part of what my message is today, and some of the things we'll go through, are ways to break out of this so that you're in charge, in control, and not worrying about how things might turn out. So Jeff Immelt basically says, look, the challenge you must accept right now is to make yourself better every day. And that's kind of my theme, as I've said. We're going to go through some soft skills. You're here, you're signed up, you're LinkedIn, and some of the things we talk about, I want you to really think about applying almost immediately, even when we hang up after this hour is over, and actually try to improve your productivity on a project you're working on, be more decisive, do some of the things that we talk about here, or at least get started and think about them. For openers, let's cover a couple things. Welcome to the real world. It's kind of almost not needing to be said, but there is a real world out there. We could all have different definitions of it. Most of it is not very complimentary or upbeat or positive, but I think that the real world is out there, and we can make our way in it if we have a good idea of where we're heading and have the skills to get there. And certainly being in the engineering field and having gone through engineering school, which is a tough place, and I've been there and you know it, is something that will help you in the real world to make it a good life. But the other thing that you need to understand, this is something that a lot of younger engineers haven't gotten used to yet, perhaps. The real world isn't neat. There is a transition that you need to go through from the college years where it was pretty neat. You got courses you took, every professor gave you a syllabus, gave you things to read, assignments that you had to do by certain days, and all that sort of thing. And then you get out into the work world, and things come at you from different directions. Needless to say, in communications today, we get emails, we get phone calls, we get text messages, we get tweets, we get all sorts of things, and we're trying to do our work. And so we have to somehow manage in a world that is not neat, that the priorities are not clearly set out for us, that we have a lot of problems in dealing with. And some of the things we'll talk about hopefully will help you in that, making it a little more orderly and organized so you can achieve well. And of course, there's never enough time. That is the thing, time that we all have to get used to. We can't pull all-nighters anymore that perhaps we did studying for finals, or unless we're consulting consultants that are on the the day before a big deliverable is due. So, in a sense, there is never enough time, but everybody listening to this webinar has the same amount of time. We all have the same amount of time. Every person breathing on this earth right now has the same amount of time. And I'm not going in the direction of saying, well, you just have to get up earlier in the morning, you have to stay up later at night, you have to live a 24/7 life of more and more work. Or no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that you have to look at the time you have and what you want to do with that time and manage that time. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to setting priorities and managing your time. So just think that time is really the most valuable resource that you have. You can't recoup it. When we're done at 3 o'clock, this hour will have been spent, and hopefully it will be a good use of your time to move forward in a better way. And what we'll cover is a toolkit of soft skills where the things we cover, and we won't cover them in depth to be sure, are things that you need to learn and perhaps you already know and are comfortable with, and apply and apply. It's not a question of just learning them, but you need to apply them. You need to find out what works for you. Not everything we talk about or can be done in the same way. I keep track of my time in a certain way, and probably like no one else who's in the room right now with us. Uh, or other people will do things differently because they will have to find out what works for themselves. But the key is to really get comfortable with these soft skills, much like driving a car. I have a metaphor that all of us, or most of us in the room, are able to drive a car, have learned. In fact, some of you, if you don't have a driver's license, I always say, go get one. You'll need it not only for identification, but certainly to be more effective. Participants, by the way, remember to type questions in the chat pod. I'm taking a look at them as we go along here as best I can without disrupting my flow of thought. And yeah, there are birds in the real world. Thank you, KG Fox. uh, so the thing I want to ask you is a trick question right now. Who out there wants to be a chief engineer or a chief executive officer, a CEO? Okay, who's out there that is aspiring to that right now in their careers? Now, obviously, we have people of all stages in their careers. Oh, lots of hands went up. Geez, I didn't know they could do that, Helen. So a lot of hands have gone up in my little screen here, and that's good. I didn't know you could do that, folks. Congratulations. Well, the thing is that it is a kind of a trick question because it's not a trying to get you to see who's out there who's very ambitious or whatever. We all want to do the best we can and in our career, and we don't know where it's going to take us. But the point I'm raising here is that hello, you already are the chief executive officer. You are the chief executive officer of yourself. You are already in charge and doing things that a CEO needs to do, of making decisions, of behavior, of even decisions and deciding to come to the webinar today. So there are many skills and attributes that a CEO has that you can emulate because you need to do that to live your life right now. And I think some of this came in when I read a review of my book a few years after it was published, and the review is by a non-engineer. It was actually in Civil Engineering Magazine, and in the middle of the review of the book, which covers the soft skills we'll get to in a moment, and he said, what Selinger is talking about is taking responsibility in your life. And I had been doing this seminar for more than a dozen years at that point, and I stopped and I said, what is he talking about? And I thought about it, and I said, my goodness, he's absolutely right. I am preaching here taking responsibility for your life. If I'm sure many of you have done that in some measure at this point, but going forward, it's really taking more responsibility for making decisions, for managing your time more effectively, for doing things that perhaps you put off or maybe you were shying away from. So whether or not you get to be a chief executive or a chief engineer at some point in the future, the point is that this is the attitude that will help you now. Um, Now, Donovan has asked, what happens in case where we, as engineers who think outside the box, are faced with a management team who are not open to change and afraid to try? Well, Donovan, I don't have a simple answer for you, buddy. I think that that's a challenge that engineers have or technology professionals have in today's world, and I'm going to allude to that in a few minutes in a couple of areas of skills because we as engineers need to be able to communicate what it is we're trying to do and understand the context in which our organization is so that when we're talking to managers or management team or directors of HR or other parts of the organization, CFOs, chief financial officers, that we can fit our projects and programs and be able to explain them and also be able to implement them and so forth. So it's not an easy question. I actually wrote an article in Spectrum magazine on this, and as a sidebar, anybody can contact me. My email address is very easy to find. It's at the end of the presentation, and you could either go on the Spectrum website or my website, or send me a message, and I'll be happy to send you my article on any one of the things we talk about. Now, the other point I want to make, and just for openers, is I'd like you to remember, as if you forgot already, that technical competency is the core of your career success. You're all trained and educated as engineers, electrical engineers, and that's of course going to be important and the core of your success. So nothing I say in this webinar, is really going to touch on your technical competency. Now I'm going to change my tune a little bit, or a lot. Everything I say in this webinar is geared to your technical success, your career success, because your ability to be able to articulate and speak and present your ideas and be more decisive and manage your time and these kinds of things will be so important in your career. After a 6-hour seminar, which is my main seminar on this subject, the head of the person that invited me to give the seminar came up to me very excitedly and said, you're right. 90% of what I've been doing in my 30 or 40-year career relates to these soft skills. And so, that's something that perhaps the folks who are further along your career can reflect. I see Jeff too has said besides management, there are also legal, accountants, and block engineers. Well, again, yes, but in all my projects where I have uh, implemented things like internet kiosks at the New York area airports back in the 90s. I had to deal with lawyers and accountants, and I therefore had to be aware of what the financial aspects were or what the legal aspects were, and get them involved in things. Um, and Paul just asked, how do we balance these things? Well, yeah, I think that I'm going to hopefully cover that a little bit, Paul, if I haven't already, as we go through this. So let's bear with me here. Okay, let's turn now to the soft skills, and I've arrayed them in a checklist. So I think that as you're out there, think in terms of what, as I go through each item, which ones you're comfortable with, or in fact, which ones are you not comfortable with. And that's really the key. Things that we tend to be comfortable with, we're good at, and we do them well, and that's wonderful. But I think the value of this webinar to me, for you, is to identify and jot down which soft skills you are not comfortable with, or not know how to do, or feel inadequate, because you need to be good, or at least fairly satisfactory at every one of these things. You can't take your car out and drive the car and then not know how to get on the highway, or not know how to make a left turn into traffic, or maybe in some cases not learn how to parallel park. Well, you do need to know those things. So it's better to know what they are and then get on a stick and go after them. So this is a checklist. Let's start off with what is the typical starting point for many engineers, that we're not good communicators, that we can't write, that we can't speak, that we can't listen even. And I think I want to start here because I don't think it's necessarily that true. On the other hand, these are 3 skills. Notice I didn't call them communication skills, which is, of course, is probably on everyone's resume, and rightly so, because it's a key word, and every manager, every person who wants to hire somebody will put in there that they want somebody who has excellent communication skills. But I'm being a little sarcastic here, because I view these as 3 separate communications, 3 separate skills. So, of course, let's start out with better writing. Better writing. We all write things. We write emails, tons of emails. We even write texts now, text messages. We write project reports. We write monthly reports. We write letters, business letters. We write specifications, although I don't know if specifications can be considered writing, but that's a little joke, haha. But we write a lot, and I think that I'm not saying that each of you or each of us has to be such a good writer that we can write a novel or a personal essay or a book. Actually, writing my book was the single most difficult thing that I had to do in my career, and it was mainly just getting the focus time on that, not the writing itself. But where I'm going on this is that I want to leave you with one key thought about writing, and that is, listen up, this is important. Everything you write, everything you write needs to be understood by the people who are getting it. All right? Everything you write needs to be understood by the people who are reading it. They may not be there to have you clarify something, whether it's an improper date or some kind of misspelling that changes the clarity of something, using too many acronyms, any number of things. And also, it doesn't have to be that all technical people are reading your work or that particular message. It could be non-technical people. It could be some of those management or legal people or accountants who are reading it, or the lay public or elected officials. So when you are writing something, and before you hit the send button, if it's an email sort of thing, make sure that or do your best to make sure that it's understandable by people, because a lot of waste of time is when people have to get back to you and say, did you mean Tuesday the 14th or Wednesday the 13th? That sort of thing. So focus on it and maybe get some folks to help you on that, and try to do a better job of writing. It's such an important skill. Now, speaking is a different animal. Speaking is a different animal. You will have occasions to get up in front of a group of people, or your staff, or at a staff meeting, or even on a webinar. And this is really the first time that I've ever done a webinar. I've actually participated in one like a panel, but I had some focusing I had to do here to decide and determine how I was going to approach this speaking assignment. But I want to start out with the basic speaking situation that this was the most difficult skill I had to improve on from my college days through the early part of my career. And what I usually start seminars by saying is, just because you're an engineer with great technical skills doesn't mean that you don't have to get up and learn how to speak in front of a group, to present your ideas, to sell them, to persuade others, to explain them to people. It is a hugely important skill, and it's something that you must learn how to do. Now, there are many opportunities and ways to learn how to improve your speaking. One I'm fond of saying, let's go back here. One I'm fond of saying is go to Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a public speaking club that's been around for 70 or 80 years, and their chapters all over the country. You can look up their website, www.toastmasters.org, and get involved in that. And I think you'll be very impressed with their effectiveness in helping people speak. Now, listening skills is actually still my weakest area, I believe. Effective listening, listening to people you're having conversations with, listening to your boss, listening to questions, listening or attempting to look over at your questions here in the chat bar as well as I'm trying to speak to you. With doors closing, technology, can you fix that sort of thing, someone out there? But listening skills are something we don't learn how to do. And I'm going to maybe give you a clue of a key factor. Think of having a conversation with somebody when you're talking with somebody and they're talking and you're sort of listening. Actually, what you're doing is you're waiting till the person stops talking so you can talk. You're thinking of what you're going to say. Now think about that. I bet many of you will be nodding and saying, yeah, that's interesting. And what that does is it shuts off part of your brain to really concentrating and listening to what the person is saying, what the key thoughts are. Maybe not memorizing their name if you've just met them, because that's hard to do, but get a gist of where they're coming from and what they're saying, what their project is. And a very good way to be more of a conversationalist is to actually react to what they've said. If they said they're an electrical engineer and they're involved in nanotechnology, you could say almost automatically in reply, "That's interesting. Tell me more about that," and start a conversation that way. But listening, effective listening, means taking down notes, writing on somebody's business card, paying more attention to what people are actually saying rather than spending the time in your head trying to use part of your CPU to form an answer. I see Stephen, to backtrack a tiny bit here, talks about lack of proficient technical writing. And you're absolutely right. I hope people are seeing all these chats here on the left side. So nothing I say takes away from the diversity everybody has to have in their writing skills, okay? Because we write an awful lot of different things, but just make sure it's clear and understandable and then get as technical as you need to. The next area is making decisions. And I think making decisions is the single most important cross-cutting skill, soft skill that we're going to talk about. It covers things not only, of course, in your work life, in your career, but in your personal life, being more decisive, in your life. And what I will say simply is that we don't learn how to make decisions. And let me just suggest something and take about 15 seconds of quiet time, which means I'm going to be quiet for 15 seconds. I want each of you to pretend that you just found out that a close friend or family member is going to visit you this weekend. So today is, I don't know what today is. Today is Thursday. So they're coming in Saturday, and you're going to have dinner with them, okay? And I want you to think of a place. I want you to think of a place that you're going to take them to, okay? So I'm going to be quiet for 15 seconds. Okay, now that wasn't tough, was it? Maybe it was. Everybody in the audience should have thought of a place. And I can't Well, I guess I could ask you to raise your hands, but that's not the point here. I'm going to suggest that you just made a decision in 15 seconds. But you didn't really call it that. I set it up for you to have to make a decision. And what I'm getting at is that there is a very intuitive approach to making decisions that maybe we don't think about. And basically, that's how I teach decision making. And that first step is, what's the decision I have to make? Okay, where do I take this person for uh, for dinner? I was distracted by somebody's chat here. I'm sorry. So the first step is what is a decision to be made, and I forced you to make a decision by saying, okay, hey, somebody's come in. Where do we go? But the second thing is probably the most critical. The second step, you start thinking of options. If you really kind of stop for a minute, you were thinking of a couple of different places that came to mind that you have been to and whatever. And then the third step is the quick calculus of, all right, which would the person like most, or which should we think would be most fun? Maybe price entered it into it. Maybe you were vegetarian, whatever it was. And then the fourth step, which went very quickly, was you decided. You decided on a place because maybe I was going to ask you to speak up and tell me what place you picked. The point is that I bet most of you did that kind of little calculation, little thing, and decided on something in 15 seconds or so. Now, the point I'm making is that that is the drill and the approach for making all decisions, knowing and identifying that you do need to make a decision, knowing or identifying the options, not the 17 options, but maybe the 3 or 4 options. Then, what information do you need? And when you have the information you need, and it may not be all the information in the world, but enough information to decide where you're going to go to dinner or how to solve a problem or what choice to make, then decide. Make the decision. Pull the trigger. Do it. And then get on with actually implementing the decision. Now, one underlying factor here which comes up and which prevents us from even being decisive or wanting to make decisions is that there is a fear factor. A fear factor. You heard me right. People are afraid to make decisions. There's you pick a restaurant and it doesn't work out the way you thought it did, and somebody says, "Well, who picked this restaurant? What were you thinking?" So there are right decisions and wrong decisions, and there's a real downside in our society, in our culture, to make decisions. It's better, well, you figure it out. Well, look, Bill and Jeff and John and people in the chat, Jamie, here, you decide. Anything that you pick is fine, and that is not a good way of dealing with this. You need to be more decisive. You need to get over this little hump, this little speed bump of figuring out, because being decisive is a prized skill in management. And I like KG's Fox. The more urgent the need to go to the bathroom, the more decisive a person will be. Go for it. I can't argue with that. So making decisions, start with things in work. Where are you going for lunch tomorrow? What you're doing tonight. Think in terms of breaking it up in terms of the components of identifying that you need to make a decision, what your options are, and usually options are the starting point, and go from there. Setting priorities and managing time is another critical one. I've actually prioritized, I believe, this checklist with having the more important things up front and then less important things as we go along. But setting priorities and managing your time, as I said earlier, there isn't enough time for everybody. And oftentimes we don't even think of setting priorities, because if you go to your boss with a whole to-do list and you don't know what to do first, or you have several things that you're trying to deal with and do, and you ask your boss, when do you need this? Well, you know what your boss says. He or she needed it yesterday. Well, that's not helpful. Or, I need it as soon as possible. And that is the way we do things in our Western society. But what I'm suggesting to you is that understanding what things are more important than others, what things are more urgent than others, begins to play a role in how you manage your time. I could ask you, for example, what are the three most important things you need to do? Like after the webinar is over and you get back to work, what are the three most important things you need to do? That is a thinking process that I'd like you to start integrating into your normal activities, because it's constantly going to change as you finish things and as you get new things. There'll always be this change and flux of what are priorities. Now, if you have a whole bunch of things that you don't know how to deal with, and tomorrow's Friday and maybe something needs to be done by Friday, you can go to your boss, perhaps your manager, and say, look, I've got these two different things that I need to get both of them done. Which one do you want first? Which do you need first? And you will get probably a good answer from the manager on something like that. So setting priorities and managing time is a critical skill, because it allows you to sort out things that are on your plate, and also identify things that maybe you can't do, that you can't take on further the commitment for. So you need to learn how to say no and be more assertive about that, or push it off in terms of time, or trade off things that are on your plate with things that are not on your plate. So it's a very important area, and you need to think about it. Now, being effective at meetings, and maybe we're going to get a few laughs around around the webinar table on that one. Meetings, in my opinion, can be a colossal waste of time, but they are a necessary evil. We need to have meetings, but we need to have effective meetings. There are lots of people throwing pot shots at it, meetings, bloody meetings. Let's not work today. Let's go to a meeting, or death by meeting. But I think what you need to do is read up on any approach in terms of uh, having an agenda, which is a roadmap for a meeting, having participation by all, running, if you're the leader of the meeting, running it on time, getting it started on time, and getting it finished on time. Like we started at about 2 o'clock Eastern time, and we're going to finish in about 23 minutes, hopefully taking some more questions and so forth. So this is like a meeting, and you need to work at that and not just be cowed by these long, inefficient people meetings with people sitting around a table wondering why they're there, because they are important. And in fact, the most important thing about a meeting is what's decided at the meeting, and then what happens afterwards to implement them. Understanding yourself and others is a very important thing, and I'm going to put it up here, even just in the interest of time, with another one, which is the next one, of working in teams. I think the people factor in our careers is so important. The um, the thing that there's a substance of any particular project, the technology, the whatever inherent in the substance. Then there's process issues, process of getting a project done, etc. And then there are people issues. And people issues can probably be half or more than half of your success in your engineering career. But it starts with understanding yourself first. What do you like to do? What do you get annoyed at? What happens when you get stressed out? Do you understand yourself? If you work with others, everybody is different, different personalities, different attributes, likes and dislikes. So I think you need to look at this. One of the more effective approaches to doing this is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Some of you probably have taken this or are aware of it. It's a very useful tool. You can do it online. You could do it in a meeting. And it's actually the most popular training for corporate America. I actually think that the 2-hour Myers-Briggs training I went to was the single most valuable training in my entire 40-year career. Okay? So I really can't summarize it more than the more you understand yourself and how you tick and how you work and so forth will help you with others as well. And working in teams is all about working with other people, understanding that you're put together to deal with a problem or a project or some special activity, and the people interaction in that between the team leader and the others is not your standard uh, organization chart and hierarchy of a typical unit. So it can be very difficult. It can be very rewarding. I've had my most rewarding projects implemented with using teams. I like John Pradovsky. Engineering is 20% technology, 10% economics, and 70% of human activity. That's good. Can I use that, John? Thank you. And Kale said I took the MBTI twice. And do I recommend the concept of getting things done? Of course, getting things done, if I understand what you're saying, Mauricio. But the problem I have is that you have a lot of urgent things every morning when you get to work or your assignment. And if you start spending a lot of time just getting some things done here and there, suddenly it's lunchtime and you haven't got to the important things, or at least that's typified my workflow for many, many years, if that's what you were getting at. Okay. Uh, Again, continuing the soft skills, negotiating. Negotiating is something that in the Western society, Western culture, we don't think of as a skill that we engineers need to learn. I mean, negotiating is when you go to a new car dealer and start that interplay with buying a new car. But in fact, as many of you, I'm sure, are shaking your head out there, most of the rest of the world does negotiating every day. The Asians, the Hispanics, as I said, most of the rest of the world is used to haggling or used to understanding what negotiating is all about. But one thing I want to share with you briefly is that negotiating is something that all of us do every day. It's about two parties, you and the other party, accomplishing things that both of you want, not an adversarial I win, I have to, if I win, you have to lose, the so-called win-lose negotiation, or just splitting the difference if we have a debate or a disagreement. No, negotiating really is what do I need in a situation, let's say my work environment, whether it's compensation or work hours or projects, and what do you need? What does, let's say, the company need, organization, and how do we satisfy that in terms of coming to terms and over a process called negotiating where we reach agreement. And I think that there are many books out there on negotiating. Getting to Yes is one of them. I have a few on my website, but you can walk into any bookstore, and if you're really not up on negotiating, just buy anything and read it. And I think you'll be very interested, and you'll be able to apply this in many aspects. Being more creative. I take Gilbert everywhere I go when I speak at IEEE conferences and so forth. A lot of times we're accused as engineers of not being creative because many of us have to adhere to codes and standards, and um, and many of us can't reinvent the wheel every time or start out with a blank sheet. But actually, in many of our engineering, electrical engineering areas, there are creative solutions. Every day we see new electronic gadgets and communications devices and all that. I think the key that I want to just share here is make sure the words I wish or what if are in your vocabulary. Because the minute you see a new advance in something and then apply it to your project or some issue you have, well, what if, and you're being creative, you're changing something in the paradigm that will perhaps make something better, cheaper, faster. And those are the kind of the triad of what we try to do generally in life: better, faster, cheaper. Okay. Ethics in the workplace, I want to touch on only that most of us have excellent ethics. And if this is something, and this is something that relates to your character, to your values, not necessarily being legal or illegal. And oftentimes it's things like, the safety aspects of something at a cost. Well, how do we measure that? It's important to be aware of this, to read up on this if you want to know more about it. But each of us comes equipped in our bodies with something that our stomach starts feeling it if we see an unethical situation. So a little alarm bell goes off, and so be more introspective about things like that. Adapting to the workplace, for those of you who are new in the workforce, that could be really difficult. And of course, the workplace itself could be inside in an office, could be out in a field, can be in somebody else's organization, can be a cubicle, an officle, a real office, could be an open space. And actually, this could be very difficult for people since we are animals and we basically like territory. We like to have a place with some kind of privacy or a place to put pictures up of our family perhaps and loved ones. And so every workplace is very, very different. Only thing I'll say here just as a quickie is If you're not able to concentrate in your workplace with all the distractions going on, then find a quiet place in your office or in your organization where you can go to read a report or to have quiet, concentrated time. But workplaces are still in such evolution that that's a tricky one for some people. Now, I put here dealing with stress and having fun. The last chapter of my book is called this, and I was not going to let them publish my book if they decided they didn't want this chapter. But of course, they did put it in. And I think that we need to understand stress in our lives because we all have it. And when we come out of school, we we have been through stressful situations, being stressed out and all of that. But then we know as we're in the workplace and we are get older, have a family, have a house and a mortgage perhaps, that dealing with stress is something that is hard, it does not easily go away. But we are hardwired to deal with stress. If we have a face a lion, the proverbial face a lion in the bush, we either run like heck or we stand and fight it, the fight or flight. And dealing with stress is something like that, even in the workplace, where we have to understand that it's like it gets to a point when it gets too much. Having some stress is fine, keeps us on edge, but when it gets to be too much, I use the metaphor of, or the analogy of, like the temperature gauge in your car. It gets to that red area, and we know that that's a problem. We need to reduce the stress. And reducing the stress or dealing with stress can be pushing off something, getting a little more time on something, or getting out and going and exercising, which is definitely something that your body needs to counteract and throw off the stress. And of course, and having fun. Having fun will also help you reduce the stress. And the context here is not like, okay, just leave the office and go have some fun, but in fact, make sure that fun is worked into your life, that you even make an appointment for it if you have to do that. And each of you knows what you like to do, what having fun means. It means going to movies, reading books, playing ball, whatever. And but as in our very busy lives, it often takes second place or no place because of all the other things that are pushing it out. So I think you need to, even if you need to put it on your calendar as to when I'm going to go to work out this week or the why. Frankly, I didn't work out today, and I usually do this religiously. And I'm after the webinar is over, since I've been under a little bit of stress doing something new in my life here. So I'm going to blow off some stress later and go to the gym. And that's the way that's the way I think of it in my life to keep my life kind of in a balance like that. Okay, the last, well, actually, next to last, developing leadership skills I have here. It's really not a soft skill. I'm not going to be anal about it. It's not a soft skill, but leadership skills to me are derived from a lot of the other things above. In other words, being able to communicate and speak and be able to be more decisive, being creative, all these kinds of things, team efforts, are all part and parcel of developing leadership skills, whether it's leading a team at work or a project, being a project manager, or going out and being a scout leader or some leader in your community. All these things are important, and I would urge every one of you, to think of this as a very important part of your career, whether it's during your work or off-site in your personal life, because taking responsibility and being involved in those kinds of things will have real benefits of learning how to work with people and dealing with getting things done and holding events that are really the kind of things that you will do a lot in your work life. The last skill that I talk about, and I really think it's a skill, is taking action. Taking action. Uh, and the context here is simply to not be a procrastinator. I know a lot of us out there procrastinate. I procrastinate, or at least I try to push it out of my life, and it's hard because you want to maybe deal with things on your plate and not take on something new. Well, let me wait until I have some more time to get to it. Let me get around to it is the phrase. But taking action, and I'll put it in the context of our webinar, I hope that as you look at these checklists of soft skills or anything I've said, that you've identified one or two or three things at least, but at least those, that you will take action on. Learn more about it. Immediately apply it in a project you're working on. Apply it at a meeting you have coming up this week. Look at your priorities list, your to-do list, and maybe make some adjustments. Taking action. If you start taking action, you will be a much more effective and happier person. So I put that there as a skill. And somebody says volunteering with IEEE is very helpful, and he's absolutely. So to kind of reach the end here, and we look through some questions and have some more, I think there's a bottom line for engineers. I think the bottom line is that employers expect you to know the technical stuff. If they see you're getting an EE degree from a college, from an engineering school, and you're early in your career, they expect you to know what an EE is supposed to learn and know. If you're seasoned in your career, again, they will expect you to know the technical stuff. It's important. I'm not saying it isn't. They just will expect you to know the stuff. But here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. That your abilities in the soft, non-technical skills will be discriminators in getting hired and getting retained and getting promoted. And those are three very important things. Now, let me say, be discriminators. If you have experience, demonstrate experience in speaking or in any one of these skills that we've just talked about, where you can call attention to what you were able to do in your career or this project or that, this is the sort of thing that will get you hired, or at least compared with other people who perhaps don't have those skills. And of course, we've seen layoffs in many areas of our economy. So the people who have the skills, have these abilities, will be retained where others may not. That's the harsh dealing of competition. And of course, promoted. It goes without saying. So this, to me, is the bottom line. I'd like you to think about it. The last point I'd like to leave you with is a song lyrics from John Mellencamp. John Mellencamp of Indiana. I was just at an IEEE meeting in Indiana recently, and I think there's very important words. It's what you do in your life, not what you say you're going to do. If you're not part of the future, then get out of the way. So it's what you do. It's your commitment, your accomplishments, your ability to get things done, as somebody said earlier. Not what you say you're going to do. You can't talk the talk. You have to walk the walk. That's why you need to understand your priorities, manage your time, be more decisive. And if you're not an optimistic, glasses half full, can-do person, I don't want to spend time dealing with you. So be more optimistic. Try to be more up and open, accept responsibility, and go forth. I hope this has been a good webinar for you folks. I'm going to stop in about 30 seconds here and then look at a couple of questions because I see some interesting points here. Be the best person and professional you could be. Be the best you could be. Everybody out there has a lot of smarts or you wouldn't be an electrical engineer. But be the best. Do the right thing. Try to deal with your life in a very up way and working with other people. Be professional at all times, and you will go a long way in your career. Now, I'll leave this up here while we answer a few questions. My email is there, Sullinger99, and my website is there, and I am available and would love to communicate with any or all of you. Don't think that I'm too busy, because I am busy, but the important thing is to be networking and working with people and interacting. So with that, I'd like to look at a couple of, can I get those words from John Mellencamp? Well, yeah, you can go Google it. And actually, you can go on and get them from me, because this presentation, I guess, is also be archived, so you can have access to it. I see somebody said,
Yes, this is Helen.
go ahead.
The webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in our archives by close of business on Friday.
Great, Helen. What will you recommend I do now? Helen?
I didn't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Carl?
Oh, I said, yeah. Should I just go through some of the questions on the chat?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's see. I'm navigating here. I'm not sure what I should do here. I've done actually some e-tutorials. Actually, I've done a seminar on the e-learning for IEEE. So perhaps some of your organizations have that, and I've actually recorded 4 separate hour-long sessions for which people, I believe, can get professional development hours. So that's on the e-learning website. Let's see. After 20 years, these are things that we learned but good reinforcement for me as I've been neglectful. Robert, I think you're very good to admit that. Now, here's a person with 20 years experience. These are things that should be, these skills that should be ingrained in your approach to your projects and to your everyday life and become habit forming so that you don't neglect them. And I'm not being just by rote here to say that you need to do these things. But let me give you an example with parking again. I feel I'm pretty good at parallel parking. Now, many people don't have occasion to need to parallel park, but I'm from the New York area, and I practice that a lot because sometimes I'll get a little sloppy on it. And more than one occasion, I've seen somebody who really didn't know how to parallel park, and I've gone over to them and said, "Do you want me to teach you how to parallel park?" And they were very pleasantly, they said, "Oh, would you?" So I think that these skills, and that's why I put it into a checklist, are the kind of things where you need to say, "Okay, how am I doing in this?" Give myself a grade perhaps, and then try to improve it in terms of specific things on your plate, not in the abstract, but specific tasks, specific things you have to do, and I think then they'll be reinforced, and then they'll become second nature. Um, Thanks, Paul. I really enjoyed your presentation. It's really hard sitting here in front of a screen and not really seeing you guys out there because I'm so used to being in front of large groups of IEEE folks at SPACs and section meetings and all that. But hopefully this is getting to people that couldn't get around a table easily. Mauricio says, maybe I read the 8 rules to be a good manager from Google. I just found one of them. Be a good coach, provide constructive feedback with positive and negative, and meet one-on-one often. Yeah, I other than the decision-making 4-step business, all of these things are from somewhere else that have lodged into my brain and have been useful to me as I've gone through my career, which has been a very excellent career. I've really enjoyed myself to this very moment. And I think that engineers, and maybe I'll just close on this, engineers, we engineers arguably have the most difficult education and even job situation, and probably not don't get compensated as much as we might. But at the same time, we also don't realize the importance of having to learn how to work with other people and enjoy doing that, as well as communicating more effectively. And once we start doing those things, and I think the responsibility is for each of you. Each of you needs to see which of these things you're not good at or need to improve at, and then see if it really does improve your performance at work and your happiness in your life because now you feel more in control and more confident about doing things. Okay, I'm about out of time, and I'm big on ending on time because you all have other things to do out there, I'm sure. And so, important thing on many speaking situations and meetings and so forth is begin on time and end on time. So, thank you very much for attending. I'm going to be quiet now and let Helen close off everything.
Okay, I want to thank the participants for their participation. That was great and a lot of great questions. And as I said earlier, the recording will be on our website in the archives section by close of business tomorrow, along with the slides. And thank you too, Carl, for doing such a great job.
Thank you. I love these comments. You're very welcome, everybody. Go do. Yeah, one on my website, I have a suggested reading.